Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome to the Mind's Eye Podcast. I'm Paul James Caden, and today on the show, we are going to be asking the question, is Islam a violent religion? I'm having this discussion today because there are several people that asked me this question because on my last show I was talking a little bit about some things that were written in the Quran and Islamic prophecy. I also started my other show, The Message, which deals with Sufism and leans quite heavily on a Quranic perspective of life in the end times. And this is something I've done in all of my shows since the beginning of my podcasting career, if you want to call it that, where I would mention the Sufi or something written in the Quran, and you know, people come along and they want to know, hey, isn't this violent and, conquering the world in the name of a religion? Why would you want to bother with something like that? So I think this is a great discussion to have because there's a lot about Islam that we don't know, especially here in the West. And I suppose to start the conversation off, we would have to start with the Islamic holy book, the Quran. If the everyday Westerner, picks up a copy of the Quran and starts to read it, they will, eventually find things that they will say, "Oh, look at that! Everybody was right. This is a violent book. Look what it's telling Muslims to do. Oh, this is horrible." And actually, there are some Muslims in the Middle Eastern countries who have that perspective as well. They will have the notion that we have here in America in the West, with the fundamentalist religionists who say, well, the Bible has to be taken literally. Every word, it's God inspired, is God breathed, God is the author of the Bible. We don't question any of it. We just take it at face value for exactly what it says and do exactly what it tells us to do. Now, there are some Muslims in Muslim countries who certainly have that perspective as well. They say, the Quran is Allah's book. It is inspired by God. We take it for what it says literally, and we follow everything that it tells us to do. And here is where they run into a great deal of trouble. Because what we here in the West don't understand, and some Muslims, not all, I mean, there are, of course, many Muslims who understand this. The Quran was not a book that was written like the Bible. It's not different books in a chronological order telling a certain story. And so when we read it, it can be very confusing. When I first started reading it years ago, I was like, who could look at this and say this is an inspiring book? It's like gibberish. I don't get it. I feel like a 5-year-old wrote wrote that was my initial first opinion years ago, and I remember telling my wife, I don't get it. I don't get. But as I studied and I learned and I understood that the Quran, what it is it's actually a group of revelations that were given to Muhammad. Um, I think it was over like a 30-year period that he wrote the Quran based on these revelations that he received. And each of those revelations in the Quran pertains to a certain situation or time in Islamic history. And so it's not necessarily telling modern day Muslims, you should do this. I mean, there's a framework there that, if understood, tells the modern Muslim how to behave in certain situations. But it's by no means, an overarching, command. You must do these things because you read it in the Quran. And they don't understand, nor do we here in the West, that these were revelations given at certain times during Islamic history. So, just for an example, let's focus on the very popular verse that everyone seems to focus on and uh, post on social media when they want to say, Islam is violent. And also, many extremist Muslims look at it and say, well, this is the verse that gives us the permission to go out and uh, wage jihad, holy war against the non-believer, start terrorist groups and all this sort of thing. And that is the verse that basically says, and I'm going from memory here, and it says, as far as fighting the non-believers, kill them where you find them, you know, uh, etc. and so forth. But they don't understand that later down in that verse it says, "But if they make peace, so must you." See, in the Quran, the Muslim is never um, allowed to be the aggressor. The Muslim is never allowed to attack. The Quran says if those who do that are considered those who make mischief upon the earth, and they will even say of themselves, "We are the reformers." But God does not guide these people. God does not love these people because they are the mischief makers. They are the aggressors, and God doesn't love the aggressor. So nowhere in the Quran will you ever find that the Muslims or a Muslim is allowed to be an aggressor and just attack someone and make them submit. That is absolutely against what the Quran teaches. But also, that verse has historic value, and it was given basically a little backdrop. Muhammad lived in Mecca, and it said he was very well liked when he lived there, and he was considered to be one of the best men of the community. He had a very easygoing personality. He was very wise, very gentle. And there were some who even said, if it were possible, we would make you king over us. But the problem was there was a lot of idol worship in Mecca. They had, geez, I don't know how many, I think over 100 idols. And, they had the priesthood and, their little kind of pagan cult going on. And eventually, Muhammad started preaching that there's only one God, all these idols are worthless. And the priesthood turned against him. And eventually they gathered up a group of people, because this was their livelihood. There was a lot of money, a lot of offerings given to the priests, to all these different gods and goddesses that they had. So they ran Muhammad, and his followers who accepted the message of one God out of Mecca. But that wasn't good enough. It seemed no matter where they went, uh, these people from Mecca pursued them. They were just afraid this was gonna, because it was a big tourist attraction as well. People came far and wide to Mecca, to take place in these rituals of these many gods and goddesses, and they just didn't want this, I guess, this one religion, one God religion spreading. So they continued to pursue the Muslims no matter where they went, and many of them died. And eventually, it is said that Muhammad went seeking the will of God about this, and that's when it came. You're allowed to defend yourself, kill them where you find them. If they make war, you're allowed to, slay them. But if they make peace, so must you. If they lay down the sword, you lay down your sword. So basically, that was a call for the Muslims to be able to defend themselves. It wasn't a call to go on widespread killing sprees in the name of God by any stretch. And unfortunately, um, after the death of Muhammad, because they say Islam during the time of Muhammad was actually very peaceful and very progressive. And it was after the death of Muhammad when things started getting um, tricky. And, this is the problem with human beings because there's always the power struggle of the ego. And this is why there's this Shia Sunni split in Islam, because when Muhammad died, there was one person that everybody believed was going to be his successor to carry on the message. But there was one group who said, no, we want it to be this guy. It's this person who's the rightful successor. And there was a split. So right away there were these power struggles among some Muslims, and then I think it was I think it was 1 to 300 years after the death of Muhammad that this book was written called the Hadith. And in Islam, the Hadith is to believed right next to the Quran. It's incredibly important. But what the Hadith was an individual who went around and started collecting sayings, hundreds of years after the death of Muhammad, asking people if they ever heard any stories about the Prophet. And basically, if you read the Hadith, there's some very good ones, some very nice ones, some very enlightened ones, but then there's some very bad ones, talking about, Muhammad beheading 300 Jews in one day or some such thing. And that's where the story comes from, the Hadith. And basically, 100 to 300 years later, as people going, oh, yeah, I had a grandma who knew a guy who knew a guy who said he knew a guy that, knew the prophet, and, this is what he said. This is what happened. And there's a big it's getting more footing now in Islam. More educated and progressive Muslims understanding and knowing, saying a lot of these hadiths um, are obviously not authentic because they contradict the Quran, they contradict what we actually know about the temperament and personality of the Prophet. For example, and this is one that I always give, when one goes to the evening prayer or any prayer in Islam, their designated prayer times during the day, they have to be clean. They have to wash, their clothes have to be clean. And there's the stipulation in the Quran, that if you've had, relations with your husband, your wife, make sure you are clean, bathe, don't come to the prayer, with the stain of semen, on your clothes or, on your body. Just make sure that you're clean. And there's a hadith that's included in um, quite a few of the collections among Muslims that talks about Muhammad coming to the evening prayer with his robe stained with semen, where he had sex with, his wives. So right there, that would be a contradiction. That if that were true, that this guy's not living the religion he preaches, and the holy book he's saying was revealed to him, because here he is, he's coming to the evening prayer meeting with stains all over his robe. That's kind of nasty. So there's a lot of things like this, and they're saying these hadiths really have to be looked through, which ones are may be authentic, which ones are not, which ones contradict what we know about the prophet, which ones contradict the writings in the Quran. And depending on the sect and the group, because it's like any other religion. And you get these imams who, they want to be Like the priests in Christianity, we're the ones in charge. We're the ones who, tell you everything you need to know. Follow what we say. And some of them, like the clergy in Christianity, are, nasty buggers. And they will include in their collection of hadith the most outrageous and violent, authenticated ones, just to say we're allowed to do this nasty, violent, terrible thing because the prophet did it, even though it completely contradicts what is written in the Quran. So that's one of the big problems is with the hadith, uh, having these haphazard collections of things that are just completely outrageous. And the other question, people want to know is, what about this going to heaven and getting seven virgins or whatever the case may be? That is not in the Quran at all. That actually came from another book. I don't remember the guy's name because it was an Arabic name. It was written a number of years ago, and I think the book was called The Way of Islam, and he was the one who came up with this notion that when one goes to paradise or heaven, God will give him, like 70 virgins or whatever the case may be. Um, and people just believed it. It just became a thing because I guess the book was very popular among Muslims at the time. So, like any other religion, there's problems, there's uh, men interfering, you know, inserting their ideas, inserting their doctrines, inserting these very screwed up, you know, hadith writings, not explaining to people how the Quran was actually written. That each verse, each chapter was written, or as each surah, as they call it, was written, and it had its historic contents as to what was going on in the life of Muhammad and the early Muslims. And it gets messy. It gets messy when people do this. And if you look back at Islam, people will say, historians say it, that there was a time where it was the most progressive religion um, in the world, as far as, adherence to science, scientific and mathematical discoveries. Their civilizations were very modern. There was a time in the Muslim countries where, women didn't have the hijab, I think it's called, the scarf they put around their head and you can only see their eyes. There was a time where this wasn't so, but this more very political, very superstitious, very, dare I say, convoluted version of Islam started taking over, largely because um, the governments, began as they do today. They have this religious political system that's very oppressive. And, it's something that spread, and, there's so much that was lost, and it took the Muslim nations and the Muslim religion um, back to the Stone Age. It took away, all education, all science, all the wonderful things that, early Islam was giving to their communities and even the world. And it's sad to see, but this is why a lot of Muslims want to come to America, so they can practice their religion without all of this oppression and all this fear and all of this superstition. Um, I was reading a book written by a Sufi Muslim, which was the the mystic branch of Islam, and he was saying, that through his journey through Islam before he entered into Sufism, he remembers being at a mosque and hearing the imam preaching that, if ever a Muslim were to neglect the prayer at dawn, his punishment will be severe in the hereafter, and there will be heavy stones piled upon his head. And he was saying, what an awful and terrible thing to tell people, and what a horrendous image of God, to brand in people's minds. So there are a lot of Muslim scholars and historians and teachers and um, even those in Sufism who are really calling for the reform of Islam and saying, it has so much to offer the world in way of spirituality and meditation and personal peace, living in peace with one another. And it does. If you get into the mechanics of what Islam really is, and even the name Islam, we get this thing, you have some of the Muslim, oh, Islam, it means, submission to God. We are his servants. And that might be so, but they almost their definition and their tone is angry about it, submission, you know. But actually, what Islam means is peaceful submission to God. And it just means peacefully submitting to the higher laws of the universe, a higher way of living, doing right. It has nothing to do with being beaten down to your knees and, heavy stones piled on your head, in the afterlife if you didn't say a prayer at dawn or anything of this nature. So again, like any other religion, it's had a lot of things, injected and inserted into it that really turned it into a mess. And generally, it's usually the people that make the mess that come to the forefront of a thing and uh, seem to have the loudest voices. They're very aggressive. This is why even when you see terrorist attacks in the United States or, in Europe, and we don't get to see it here, not much of it anyway, but you see these poor Muslim people, in these countries, standing out in the streets, by their, disheveled little homes in the middle of the desert, holding signs saying, "We're sorry, America. This is not the religion of our prophet." You see, most of the people there are oppressed with this military style political Islam that's, overtaken the government and the country, and they don't want that form of Islam. They'd much rather be freed from it. And those who can, go to come to the United States, Canada, Europe, and of course some of the radicals do as well. But it's a sad thing to see because if you understand, these things about Islam, you understand, how the Quran was written, you understand about the Hadith, what the problems are there with it, and you start to brush away some of the dust and sand, you do find a very peaceful, a very enlightening religion. But it's difficult. I'm right now taking a course in what is called Ruqya, which is a Muslim form of mystical healing through recitation or reading of the Quran over a person. And it's something I've always been very interested in, and I actually found a course that's quite thorough and explaining how it's done. And I was very glad to hear the instructor say, some people who try to teach Ruqya make it seem like, brain surgery or open heart surgery, but it's not. It's actually very simple. So it's quite a nice class. But I also the individual teaching it is not a Sufi, and just some of the things that he says sometimes when referring to the Quran or the Prophet or the religion of Islam. It makes my toes curl a little bit in my shoes because and this is someone from the Western states. He's someone from the UK who converted to Islam, and obviously his background and his training is very much in this. There will be severe punishment and blah, 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 blah. So he sometimes gets on these rants, and I'm like, oh boy, can we just stick to the point, instead of trying to indoctrinate with the heaviness and the fear, of this particular form of Islam, because this is what drives people away from religion. This is what drives people away from God. It's what is sinking the ship of Christianity here in the West. And it's starting to sink the ship of Islam even in Islamic countries, because we're seeing a lot of people of Islamic descent coming to the United States, and some who even live there, saying they don't care what happens to them. They're not practicing Islam anymore. It's been such an oppressive religion and philosophy in their lives, just teaching them to hate, hate, hate by the government and the imams. And people are starting to jump ship. People are looking for something better, and it's sad. And it's one of those things in Islamic prophecy where it said that Muhammad himself said that when after he died, there would be those who would come and change the religion, and the religious teachers among you will be the worst of men, and they will teach people falsehoods and to actually be those who make mischief upon the earth rather than those who, worship Allah and peace. So we see that happening. And as many of the Sufis say, that they see a lot of um, Orthodox Muslims who try to cling to an old way of life that is no longer valid for them or their religion. You have Muslims who think speaking in Arabic is some sacred magical language that you must speak, and you can never read the Quran unless you can read Arabic and can read it in Arabic. And many scholars say that's just not true, and that's ridiculous. But even in the Rokia class I'm taking, you'll get English speaking Muslims who'll be talking, and then there's this and there's this and there's this, and then suddenly their thought is interrupted because and then it's Arabic for like 5 minutes, and they start speaking English again, and it's like, okay, did you ever stop to think there might be people here that don't speak Arabic? you know, and you don't even explain what it was you said in Arabic. I mean, it's kind of, and I've heard that from people in the West who converted to Islam as well. They say they go to the mosque, they want to worship, they want to pray, but when the imam gets up to speak, they have no idea what he's saying because it's all in Arabic, even though there's many people from the West in the mosque there for the message and who converted to Islam. But they have no idea, what's being said, because it's almost like the Catholic Mass, where some people say it must be said in Latin. If it's not said in Latin, it doesn't work. The sacredness is gone. It has to be said, the Latin Mass. And to some Muslims, Arabic is kind of like the Islamic Latin. We all must be, inshallah, harabanana, all that. I picked up a few phrases, but I in no way, speak it or read it. So, there's a long-winded answer. I wanted to get all this in about a half an hour, and I know I said a lot and kind of shot through all of this in this show to try to make these points as why is um, Islam considered a violent religion, and why are some Muslims violent? And a show like this, it can't end without talking about why some of the terrorist groups were born, what was the origin of this in our modern world. And what we have to understand is that when the Jews were dispersed from the land of Israel, that land was uninhabited for over 1,000 years. So the Palestinian people, of course, they migrated in, they started building their homes and their cities and their towns, and they lived there for a long time. And then one day in the 1960s, when they decided the United States and Europe were going to send all the Jews back home to their homeland and make Israel a state because it's written in biblical prophecy and we're going to help this to happen. They basically went over there, with our armies and knocked down doors and said, guess what? This is their land. Get out. So, how would you feel if you and your ancestors lived in a land for 800 years, 900 years, 500 years, and then one day, knock, knock, get out. It's not yours. And they moved you out physically by force, killed you if you didn't leave because, hey, this is their land. And we hear so much about the 3 Day War. Those dastardly Muslims. Tried to wage war on the newfound Israeli state. But they were beaten back by the good guys. Well, yeah, they tried to take their homes back. They were basically thrown out on the street. They were homeless. They had nothing. This was not done peacefully. This was not done diplomatically. It was just, we don't care, get out. And so over time, as we know, the Palestinians, they still don't have a land of their own. They still don't have proper homes. They're like prairie dogs, just lost in the desert sands. And it seems everybody's got to sit around and argue, should we give them land or shouldn't we give them land? Should we give them the Gaza Strip? No, we shouldn't. Should we give them this? No, we shouldn't. And these people are, pardon my language, pissed off because their ancestors, their mothers, their fathers, their grandparents, some of them when they were kids, this was only 1960s folks, thrown out of their homes with nothing. And some of them peacefully go through it. They pray for, a day when things will be better. But then there is the more angry and violent among them who form these groups, that our enemies must be destroyed. And that's the genesis of why there are some Islamic groups and terrorist groups who say Israel must be destroyed and so must America. And that's what it stems back to. Not that that's right, it's absolutely wrong. Two wrongs do not make a right. But certainly from there, the terrorist group ideology has spiraled in other directions, in different directions. Who is the great Satan? Who deserves to die? Who should be, beaten into submission? Who should we form, jihad against? It starts going in all kind of wacko directions with these sects. But that was pretty much the genesis of it, and why some uh, Muslim groups, and there's quite a lot of them who see Israel as this enemy that needs to be destroyed. There's a resentment there. That's why there is the resentment between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And again, it's not right, but we always have the idea that, those damn Muslims, how, their 3 Day war, those bad people that always tried to, come and, overtake that fledgling nation of Israel because they just hate them so badly. They're such bad people. This is why. It's like your family buying a home and it's in your house for generations. And one day somebody comes and knocks on the door and says, the previous owner, uh, the previous owner's kids who own this land before your great 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 grandfather, this is actually their land. You have to get out. And there's cops and there's guns, and they throw you out in the ditch in the middle of a desert or the wilderness and just say, there you go, screw you. All right, the new people can move into your house and just, take it over. Yeah, you'd be mad. So we and that's again in Christianity, the Zionist movement, pro-Israel, the Christian Zionist movement, because they believe that move in the 1960s was biblical, it was righteous, it was what God wanted, and they take no account or no thought for what they did to these other people who are still displaced to this day, who have their little desert towns walled off with chain link fence from crossing over. They can't even step a toe over the line to Israeli country. To go to hospitals, they need to go into Israel, and they have to get papers and documents to go into Israel, to go to the hospital to get life-saving treatment. And sometimes the guards at the gate look at their legal papers and deny them entry, beat them down with the butt of their rifles. Some of the Palestinian towns walled off from the Israeli land with chain link fence over their marketplaces, and as they go and try to buy, meat and vegetables and shop, there are Israeli citizens on the other side of that fence in apartment buildings and houses throwing toilet water with sewage in it down on the Palestinian people below because they're looked at as dogs. See, this is what we don't see. This is what we don't hear. And again, that's not an excuse to say, yeah, let's, rally those terrorist groups, because the terrorist groups are insane. They're evil. It's just another sect of Islam that has poisoned and polluted and is destroying the religion with this ideology. But again, it's not what it was meant to be. It's not what a lot of modern day Muslims want it to be. And so there's a lot of issues there, a lot of things we don't understand, a lot of things we take for granted. And, I, for one, think the world should do something for these poor people that are just oppressed and live, maybe a step or two above homeless people in the middle of a desert. The Israeli government orders these, complexes to be built so they have better homes. They build it, and then the Israeli people move into it and say, no, you can't have this either. Beat it. It's such terrible treatment that these people get. But through that Zionist lens of evangelical Christianity, we're always seeing, how those people are the bad guys. So again, we have screwed up religion in evangelical Christianity and fundamentalist Christianity, creating another Frankenstein of screwed up religion, you know, in these extremist groups in Islam. And this is just goes to show that when man gets involved in religion, tries to take it over, tries to dictate what it is, what it means, how everybody should behave, how everybody should worship, um, it becomes a real mess. And that's why truth is so hard to find in this world. All of us who are seekers are always seeking because there's so much rubbish that we need to get through. So many lies, so much disinformation, so many man-made doctrines and things that are inserted into the holy books that were written by men and councils and popes, and it really, and there's no religion that's free from that sort of thing. And it just makes the discovery of the truth that much more difficult to find. And that's one of the reasons I really like Sufism, because they say, of course, you have the Quran, you have prayer, you have the life of the prophet and some of the things that he said, and of course, the other prophets, Moses, and of course, Jesus, and many others. But the ultimate truth is making connection with God in your own heart. It's experiencing the divine within yourself. And that's something I've believed all my life, even when it was buried under religious garbage, because a lot of religion is garbage. And, you really have to listen with the heart and experience with the heart. And that is where we will find more truth and more peace from the divine. So, folks, I went a little overtime. I'm going to shut up now. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you got something out of it and learned something that you didn't know before. I appreciate you listening. Stay safe, stay well, treat one another with love, decency, and respect, no matter what your religion is, no matter what the color of your skin is, no matter what nationality someone is. We're all human beings. We all deserve acceptance, love, and just respect from one another. Thank you again for listening. I'll talk to you again next time here on the Mind's Eye Podcast.